Boss, Meris, or Strymon? Which delay reverb combo are you going to pick for your pedalboard? Every week, Goodwood Audio does pedalboard setups for customers at one of our locations. And almost every board we set up will have some sort of multi-delay or multi-reverb pedal on it. And what I mean by that right off the bat is it's a delay pedal with a bunch of different algorithms on it. Bucket brigade, tape, digital, reverse, all sorts of things built into this one unit. Most of the time they're able to be recalled by MIDI, and the same applies for reverb. Obviously, this is not going to be a secret to you if you're watching this, that the most common currently is Strymon Timeline and Big Sky. But very quickly now, gaining in popularity is Meris with the Mercury X and LVX. These pedals are something to behold. I am personally quite a fan of them and the flexibility they allow. But I'm also going to throw in today some pedals that I think I should be seeing a lot more often, and that is the Boss DD500 and RV500. Their take on a multi-delay, multi-reverb style pedal. It is pretty impressive, especially when you think about how long it's been out. So today I'm going to go through the basics. I'm not going to go hugely in depth to all of the intricacies that you can pull off with each pedal. We're going to do the basics of a digital delay, a plate reverb, then more into an analog style delay and a Hall reverb, and then we're going to get into a bit of modulation and ambience, and lastly, my favorite sound that I pulled from each set. So I basically just spent a couple of hours trying to find favorite sounds of each pedal and can show you a little bit more of the capabilities of each unit in that regard, some of the weirder, wackier stuff that it can pull off. First though, I just want to get into, again, some of the basics. For almost all of these, I kept the settings quite simple. So I kept, for example, on the plate, I kept things EQ-wise right down the middle, not super bright, not super dark. I was trying to find a mean average for everything that we could compare against. And a lot of these algorithms, the digital delay, for example, they sound pretty similar across all. The reverbs, though, are where it really differed, and neither of these are going to be sounding necessarily better or worse, depending on what you're after. It's more these companies' take on what a plate reverb sounds like, and there are different types. What kind of room are they modeling their hall after? What size is that room? There were decisions made in the engineering process that will end up with different sounds for the different algorithms, and we're just going to go through a few of the most popular today and see what you think. I'll give my opinions here and there along the way, but I really want to shy away from saying this is better than this or this one is terrible in comparison to that, because it really is a preference game. What do you like and why? And then you can make a decision from there. So firstly, we're going to get into plate and digital reverb, and I'll put on screen which pedal you're listening to at each point in the audio examples. Let's get into it. Okay, so coming out of that, you just heard some of the plate reverb only first, and then we went into plate and digital delay on at the same time for each set. So you're going to be either listening to Strymon only, Timeline Big Sky, Meris only, LVX into Mercury X, or Boss, the 500 series, delay and reverb. So the thing that stuck out to me, I'm curious if you heard a similar thing, is Boss's plate reverb is nice and bright. It's lively. Of course, you can shape some of the tonal aspects, some of the EQ with all of these pedals, I have to say. But I really like just the dial it up quick Boss sound. The plate reverb was great. The digital delay on that one was a little bit quieter than I would have liked. I should have turned that one up just a little bit more, but it came through. It's a classic Boss digital delay. What goes in comes out the other end. Clean, sharp repeats. Really enjoyed it. And I don't really have anything bad to say about the Boss, let's say, audio example 1. It was straightforward. It was easy to use. Perfect. Loved it. Then into Meris. So Meris has unprecedented flexibility to the point where the biggest complaint I hear about Meris is that it's too complicated. And when you're coming into, let's say, a multi-delay, multi-reverb, even if it's for the first time, no matter which unit you're going to get, it's going to be a little intimidating if you're not used to the menus and all of the different options available to you. But even more so with Meris, there are a lot more options. But I have a hack for you. And this is something I found out really quickly, is you will get a bunch of options as you go through the menu. But your biggest friend here, if you're trying to dial up sounds quickly, is just ignore 80% of it. Dial up the delay type, the reverb type, a little bit of the extras, feedback time and decay, pre-delay. Dial all that stuff in and then ignore the filter, the sequencer, compression, the preamp. You can bypass all that stuff if you're trying to get something quick. But if you want to dive in and really customize your sound, the Meris allows you to do that on both LVX and Mercury X in a way, again, that I just haven't seen before. It is very modular. You can reorder the signal chain of all the different parts very easily and get drastically different sounds, which you'll hear later in the video. Then lastly, into Strymon, Timeline, and Big Sky. Again, I really enjoyed the plate reverb on this. The digital delay, in my mind, I just don't really have much to say on the digital delay. I feel like this must be one of the more straightforward ones to replicate since this is a digital platform anyways. And so they all sounded more similar than not as far as the digital delay. The plate reverb definitely had some differences. Boss was the brightest. Strymon was kind of middle of the road. And then Meris has the most flexibility, but by default was a little bit darker than the others. But the good thing, and this is the same for Strymon and for Boss, is we can EQ these things to our taste per preset. There is so much flexibility here for all of these pedals in this regard. And so I think as far as these pedals and which one stands out, they're kind of a wash right now. And I think all three do a really good job. So why don't we continue on into kind of more the analog bucket brigade type sound, analog delay. So what you're going to typically hear is going to be the first repeat is quite clean and then you get darker and darker. The very common analogy in the music industry here is that each repeat is one bucket of water being passed down a line to people. Every time it passes, or each time you hear a repeat, a little bit of water spills out. That is the brightness, the clarity, the quality, the hi-fi nature of the delay is getting basically ripped to shreds every time you hear a repeat. It is degrading more and more. So let's get into that, and then paired with this, we're also going to hear hall reverb, and you guys will hear the differences in these reverbs as well when we get into these audio examples. So let's check out analog delay, hall reverb, and then at the end you're also going to hear some of the modulation come in there, which is where I really start to enjoy these pedals. Modulation is just the best. There's no other way to put it. So let's take a listen. So the first audio example was a Boss DD500 in its kind of bucket brigade analog delay type setting. And you would definitely hear the repeats getting a little bit darker with every repeat, so it ticks that box. What it didn't quite do though is the repeats didn't start breaking apart. They didn't start getting that almost bit crushy kind of sound to it where the repeats for a long repeat analog delay are really just starting to fall apart towards the end, a bit of extra grit and texture. It didn't do that as much as the others, whereas the Meris and the Strymon really did. I really liked those extra artifacts that you get right around repeat 4, repeat 5 in those audio examples. Things really start to fall apart in an interesting way, adding some extra texture, which I really enjoyed. So analog delay wise, I would say currently Meris and Strymon are up there for me. But if you don't like all those extra artifacts towards the end and you just want the darker repeats, the DD500 did great. For the hall reverbs, you're going to hear on these pedals probably that the Boss was a little bit brighter. The cool thing about all of these pedals is that you can kind of choose your room size and tweak things to taste. Especially on the Boss, you can pick small, medium, or a large hall. And this one was set to medium, so it's a little bit brighter maybe than the Meris and the Strymon. Strymon you can pick, I believe they use the word concert and stadium. And all of these pedals you can also, again, tweak the EQ. Something that is really handy to have for reverbs if you use quite a bit of reverb is a high pass or some way to shelve out some of the bottom end so it doesn't get boomy and overtake the mix in kind of a nasty way. So if I was to redo the Meris one or actually use it live, I would probably put a little bit more of a high pass. But again, I was trying to keep this as basic as possible. Same with the Strymon. I would shelve out some of that bottom end where that wasn't as much of an issue on the RV500. But again, you can tweak the EQ on all of these. I did like the sound of the hall on the Meris and Strymon in the sense that it was right out of the gate a little bit bigger sounding, and it was probably based off a slightly bigger room. Because when I go to a hall, I want it to be more towards the ambient style setting. I want you to know that a reverb is turned on. If I want it to be more subtle, I'm probably going more spring plate or a smaller room entirely. And so when a hall's on, I want you to know it's on. That's my personal preference. And I think that Meris and Strymon do a better job in that arena. Now into my favorite part of this audio example, which was the modulation. So you heard this with delay, some hall reverb, and then obviously modulation on top. And the standout in this one for me was probably the Meris in the sense that you have so much flexibility here. And if you're into modulation, then you really get the best of anything you could really ask for. And the reason I say that is the chorus sounded great. And that's what we had on in this audio example. But there's flanger, there's phaser, but more importantly than that even, for me, is that you can place this modulation wherever you want in the signal chain of the delay. So we can place chorus right after the input jack of the LVX, which basically behaves as if you had a chorus pedal placed right before the delay. You can then place it in the post-dry section, but still before the actual delay algorithm. So the dry is unaffected by modulation, goes straight to the pedal's outputs, and then you hit modulation, then you go into the delay. You can also place it in the feedback loop of the delay and then in the post section of the pedal after the delay has been applied. And the flexibility that you get and the signal chain options that you get with this pedal at the quality of the modulation it just blew me away. I had so much fun with this. A second place for this one in my mind was Strymon. It was a little bit heavy in the audio example, but I was trying to really show off the modulation here. So you probably wouldn't run it that crazy unless you're just trying to make a point. I love modulation. And other than that, you'd probably dial it back. But it was really interesting to listen to, interesting to use, sounded good, had that kind of warmth of that chorusing effect with a little bit of extra kind of flavor going on there, a lot of movement in that modulation. But it didn't have the same flexibility that the Meris had. And then you might be surprised to hear that on the Boss, the DD500, that modulation, I had to turn it up really high, almost maxed, and it was still pretty subtle in comparison to the other pedals. So for me right away, that's a little bit of a red flag for me, being someone that loves chorus in their delay and I love messing around with different modulation types. Of course, I could just run a chorus pedal before the delay. But if we're talking about these units as standalone kind of sets, Strymon, Meris, and Boss, I really wish that you could get a little bit more mileage out of that modulation. Other than that though, even the Boss has multiple options. I believe they have a tri-chorus, a bi-chorus, and maybe one or two other options as well built in. So there is more flexibility as far as options go in the modulation section on Boss than there is on Strymon. But it's kind of a toss-up what you like and what you're really after. Again, I think the Meris is a standout. So far, all of these pedals are doing very well in my book, and we're just kind of going back and forth on feature sets at this point. So let's move on to the next one, which is getting into ambience. So this is where I basically took the pedals themselves, I dialed up an ambient sound that I liked, rather than trying to match the ambience exactly to each other. I just dialed up some Hall reverb and some warmer delay repeats and tried to get a really washy sound that could act as a pad or fill out the bottom of a mix for people to add color on top of. And so the ambient sounds are quite a bit different, and I'll talk about the pros and cons of what I liked and didn't like about these after the audio example. So that's ambience. I know ambience right out of the gate is kind of like pie. Everyone likes a different flavor. And so you might listen to that and think, that's not ambience, it wasn't patty enough, or that was way too sustained. You'll have your opinions on my sound choice, but at the end of the day, the things I really liked about Boss has great sustain, easy to dial up a sound, but the thing I love the best, and this is a per preset function, is you get control over the wet from 100% to 0, and separately the dry from 100% to 0. So you can dial in and just finesse the balance, which for ambience is very important, that balance between wet and dry. The same thing goes for Meris, that balance between wet and dry, it's a non-issue. You can dial it in so easily and just perfectly, down to the tiniest little adjustment. And I think the thing I really liked about the Meris in this example is the options and the availability for adding some texture and grit. So you can add a lot of texture in multiple different ways, which especially on the Meris you're going to hear in my favorite sound example, which is coming up next. But the ability to dial in an ambient sound with pitch, with texture and grit, bit crusher, all that is very easy to do. And again, with some modulation and movement in there at different points in the signal chain of the delay, which I just chatted about before, it really makes it easy to come up with a whole range of ambient sounds, a whole suite of them. And then the Strymon, I mean, I feel like Strymon, I don't know if they pioneered this, but they really made a name for themselves in the cloud reverb in the big sky and kind of that bloom sound that they also have available, to the point where for quite a while there, you'd hear ambience like, oh, that's a big sky. You could recognize it instantly. So Strymon has done a great job. I would say my biggest complaint, which is also a compliment to Strymon, is that I've just heard that sound so much now that I just want something different. They've almost been too successful in that regard. And so I want to hear something a little bit different. And for me, the Boss and the Meris kind of really do it for me in different ways. And I just like the tweakability that they offer in that regard. The balance between wet and dry for Strymon is harder to find, since you have to either do kill dry, where dry is 100% off, or you run it in normal mode where you get a balance of dry and wet on the mix knob, usually doing the latter with dry and wet balance. There seems to be a point where I have too much dry, and then I'll turn the knob just ever so slightly and it's too much wet, and it's hard to find that balance sometimes between the two. Whereas on the Boss and the Meris stuff, not an issue. And so that would be kind of my only complaint there, is I would want more tweakability between dry and wet levels on the Strymon stuff. Let's keep moving on and now go into my favorite sound. So again, this is completely to taste for me, but I basically just spent a bunch of time with each set of pedals, and when I found that sound, I was like, oh, that's cool. I moved on and I saved that sound and then went on to the next set of pedals. So we're gonna start with Boss into Meris into Strymon, and it kind of shows off again some of the extra options here, hopefully, that each pedal has to offer. And then we'll talk about it after and finish up the video. So now you know my favorite sounds from all these pedals. I feel like you're my first girlfriend and I just wrote you a song and played it for you, and I really want you to like it. Please like my song. So my favorite sounds. I really like the Boss with that multi-tap kind of spatial phasery type sound. I don't even really know what to call it, but it sounded great and it was so fun to dial in. In the Meris, my favorite thing here is all the texture, the movement that you can get. Again, with reordering the signal chain, adding in bit crusher and some grit, you can get all sorts of incredible sounds that are really attention grabbing. It's really hard to miss some of this stuff, and it's really nice to listen to. And then with the Strymon, that kind of heavy filter, the grit, there was a high pass filter in there. I really enjoyed coming up with that sound and that movement in the modulation. With none of these was I sitting there saying, I just can't find a good sound here, or like nothing weird or out of the ordinary. Everything had something to offer, and it was really fun finding those sounds that stood out to me. And just sitting down and playing with these things for a couple of hours was great. So as far as the favorite sounds, that was more just to show you some of the extras that these things can do. Some of the standouts for all of these pedals, starting with Boss, you can use any two algorithms on the delay at the same time. You can hard pan them left and right so you can get the stereo field going very easily. There is a lot of tweakability in this pedal, and I really enjoyed how easy it was to get in there, scroll through all the available options, mess around with settings, and instantly hear what I was actually doing, even if I didn't understand it at first. With the RV500, little hidden secret here, if you don't know, it also has a full delay suite built into it. So if you wanted to dial up a reverb algorithm with a delay algorithm at the same time, you can, all within the RV500. Obviously, tweaking and staying on top of the delay level, the reverb level, the dry level, the wet level, all that becomes a little bit more cumbersome in the one pedal. But if you wanted to just try it out and see what it could do, the RV500 is pretty exceptional for that reason. There is a lot that it is capable of, since it also has delay on every preset available to you. With the Meris, it's no secret, the flexibility, the algorithm quality, the texture, the grit, the modulation, the filters, all of it. Even the preamps, you can do a tube emulated preamp, an op amp, all sorts of different options here that I've just never seen on other similar pedals. And it just opened up a whole bunch of palettes, sounds, textures, options that I didn't even know I liked. And so I really appreciate that. And then Strymon, it just has to come down to the quality of the algorithm is awesome. The ease of use is great, but that ease of use comes at the expense of a limited feature set. And when I say limited feature set, there is a ton going on here, but limited in comparison to the other two units, especially when it's side by side against the Meris. They have to limit it to some degree to make it as easy to use as it is. So the algorithms on all of these sound amazing. You could not make a bad choice by choosing any one of these sets. But again, I think it's by this point it's probably obvious what my choice is. I just loved getting lost in the Meris pedals and coming up with sounds I've just never heard before. I was really surprised by some of the additional flexibility and options on the Boss. Being able to assign the foot switch and external foot switches to anything you want was awesome. So that's really it for today. All of these were great pedals. I had so much fun diving deeper into these units, and I hope you guys got something out of it. I also want to say all of these pedals come with computer editors. So you can save everything on your computer, do quick updates on your computer. The Strymon's a little bit harder to connect, but other than that, I mean, if you just get a cheap cable on Amazon and you can connect it to your computer, no problem. And then the app is right there. Let me know in the comments what you guys are going to be using on your board or what you're currently using. Also, what sounds I completely missed out on that I should have included in the video. Maybe we can dive into some of those later on. Have a good day. We'll see you guys next week.